Good afternoon, everybody. So,
Introduce
this
yourself.
week's... I'm sorry?
Who are you?
Who am I? This is a small family. Okay. My name is Allende Kalfani Akita, son of Dijanaba Akita and Sababu Ukwele Akita. And I'm here to interview Dijanaba Akita about part 2 of the Liberation Dialogues, the Expansion era, which was, I believe, 1973 to 1999. And we're going to make this quick as possible because I'm pretty sure that we have these awards to give out. Our first question is to explain the difficulty of leaving all that you knew. Well, let's do some background history. When did you join the church?
I joined the church in 1971.
How old are you?
I was about 3 years old.
No, how old were you? At the time.
It never ceases to amaze me that my son always asks me about my age in public. But I was 17,
Okay.
17 years old. One of the things that I found growing up in Detroit was that there were different instances where people from the shrine, from the nation, impacted my life even before I joined. When I was in junior high school, my typing teacher, you might say, was Bernard Kilpatrick, Kwame Kilpatrick's dad. When I saw Zizwe at the Quadcentennial, I said, "You remember when you used to teach me typing?" He said, "Yeah, y'all was a raggedy bunch of people." He said, I retired about a month after y'all went on. Then I went to high school, and when I got in high school, we had, which goes into the expansion thing, during that time, our founder, Reverend Albert Clay, Jeramogi Baby Achaman, was going around talking to different college campuses. And I remember my older brother was a student at the University of Michigan, your uncle. And he came back and he said, I heard this preacher give a talk on campus, and he talked about church, but not like most people do. And we stopped going to church, but I think we need to go to his church. And I said, "What church is it?" He said, "Shrine of the Black Madonna." I said, "I heard of that church." And then the next week, Cardinal Amanifu, who we're honoring today, came into our high school, and he wrote his name on the board, and he put Rev, R-E-V, Woodrow Smith, on the board. And then we were like, we getting ready to walk out. We're not here to hear no preacher. And he said, "Wait a minute. The R-E-V stands for revolutionary." And we're like, "What?" And he started telling us about things that were going on. So we were interested, and so it was a different introduction to the church for us as young people during that time. It was a revolutionary fervor, and we got caught up in that fervor, and I've been here ever since.
Okay, awesome. And explain leaving Detroit, the family that you knew, and your neighborhood, just to go down south to Atlanta, where you founded a church with just 3-4 other teenagers just like yourself.
Well, one of the things is we were in a college cadre. I was in college cadre up at University of Michigan. We had several college campuses where we had students. It was Western Michigan University, Eastern Michigan, University of Michigan, Ferris State, Chicago, University of Chicago. There were about 15 different college campuses around the country where young people had joined. And one particular Sunday, I remember coming to Shrine 1, and Jeramogi gave this speech. And he said, we need to open up the South. We had already expanded in Detroit because we had gotten so large. During 1970s, the early 70s, young people were joining in droves. It wasn't unusual to see 30 or 40 people joining every Sunday. And on the first Sundays when we have our baptism, there might be 50 to 60 people being baptized. And so one of our preachers said, the walls are crying out. We have to expand or die. And so we had opened up a shrine on the east side of Detroit. We had opened up a shrine on the west side of Detroit. We had expanded to Flint, Michigan, to Kalamazoo. And now we were going to go on national expansion. And he said, well, you know, we just need some students who are willing to go south. And if you go south, we want to open up a church which would be the gateway to the south for us. And so I remember after church going up to Rev, which is what we called them then. And I said, you know what, I'll do it. And it ended up being myself, Nika Tanae, Cardinal Judas, and a brother named Kashaka. And later on, and Bayou and Hawanya came down. But we decided that we were going to go and start a church. Because when he talked about expansion, it was more like, it was a fever. You know, we were like excited. We were like, yeah, we're going to go down there. We're going to open it up. We're going to do what we got to do. Not that we knew what we were doing, but we were just determined. And so the church got us a ride. Dr. Arimuga put us in his car, and we all drove from Detroit to Atlanta in his little car. And that was the beginning.
That was the beginning. Oh, okay, so there are more questions that I have, but I'm just going to ask two more things. One of the things is I just want you to tell the story on the day that you arrived in Atlanta.
Oh, when we first drove up in Atlanta, we drove down the street, and this is before all the newly erected buildings that are in Atlanta today. And one thing we looked around, it was like wall-to-wall black people everywhere. And we were just amazed. And the question that we had in the car was, will black folks in Georgia believe the same thing we believed in Detroit? Because, you know, we believed that in Detroit, we just really had it all together. You know, we were just progressive and we were just revolutionary to the back. And we didn't know. So when we got to Atlanta, we saw all these black people. We said, how will we begin? And our founder said, well, I want you to start on the college campus, because I was at Clark, Atlanta University. Judas was at Morehouse. Nika was also at Clark. We had another sister who joined us later at Morris Brown. And so we just began to talk to students. The first time we had a meeting, it was called the Evening with BCN. When we came together, there were about 50 people in the room, and nobody joined. And when it was all over, we said, well, that's it. They don't believe the same way we believe. We got to go. And Jeramogi called us. He said, but how'd it go? I said, nobody joined. I don't think black people in Georgia believe what we believe. He said, well, it's okay. Work on it again. We said, okay, well, we'll do it again in a few months. He said, no, next week. We said, next week? He said, yeah. So that next week, we put together a program, and then 6 people joined. And the rest was history. Those 6 people turned into another 20, and then another 30. And before we knew it, we had 100 students that were participating on a regular basis. And the next transition was that when school was out, they went home. And they didn't come back the next semester because they were from different places. So they took their message out to other places. What we didn't realize, we were thinking it was a failure because they were gone, they didn't come back. But they were actually taking black Christian nationalism back to the cities where they were from. And so that next year we began to build again. And as we did, we got another crop of black people who came in, the black students who came in. And then we converged on Detroit in what we called our College Casual Weekend, where we had about 300 college students from across the country who were sharing the experiences that we all had. And it became a powerful experience.
So, this is a two-part question. What was the point of the expansion movement, and what other places did you all expand to that we don't really talk about?
Well, our expansion movement was because we realized that the message we had couldn't stay here. See, this was before the time of Twitter and Instagram. You know, we didn't have mobile phones. If people called you and you wasn't home, they just had to wait till you came home. Now, I know today that's kind of unusual for most people because they're like, you got your phone with you all the time. But if you had to make a phone call in between, you had to stop at the corner and use the telephone booth, which they don't have anymore, I don't think. But we had to spread the word. And so unless you had a publication that could go nationally, you had to get out word of mouth. And so we were going to go to Atlanta. We also had a cadre that formed that said that we were going to go to Philadelphia. We had plans on going to New York, to Washington, D.C. And as a young person, our thought was, we're going to stop in Atlanta, then the next year we're going to go somewhere else. And so we thought we were just going to be traveling all around the country, on this expansion movement that we had. But we knew we wanted to, we were missionaries. So once we got to Atlanta, it didn't stop there. Expansion moved on. We had a group that came from Detroit and those from Atlanta, and they came here to Houston and formed another church. And once we got here to Houston, our thought was, when we leave Houston, we're obviously going to go to Washington, D.C., or maybe we're going to go to New York. But then we decided that we needed to stop the urban expansion, and then we began to talk about having a connection to the land. And that's when we came up with Beautyland. Beautyland was our connection to the earth, that we were going to have some land that we could create those institutions that was necessary, because it wasn't about just having buildings and churches, it was about having institutional power. And Beautyland was going to give us the institutional power. So then we pulled all of our resources together and said that we're going to create the resources necessary so we could create Beautyland. When we first talked about Beautyland, none of us knew what it was going to look like. I remember putting together a model when I was in Atlanta on a little table, and I put little silos and cows, but we had no idea what could it be. And once we got Beautyland, that was a phenomenal experience, because here we had 5,000 acres. You know what that means? 5,000 acres. We were connected to the land. We had created a power base by which we could build for future generations. See, expansion was all about legacy building, because we were expanding not for ourselves, we were expanding for those who were going to come after us. So expansion is not about just moving from one place to the next, because we used to moving from one house to another house. But we were building a legacy that could go on from generation to generation. Like your generation. We were doing things, as teenagers, as young people, we were doing things that meant that if we thought about it in our rational minds, it would have been impossible. When I first got to Atlanta, I had a little work-study job at college, and I remember one of the employers came and said, what made you move to Atlanta? I said, well, I'm coming here because we're going to build a church. And everybody in the office just bust out laughing. I mean, they just cracked up. I mean, not just, little laughter. They was falling off their chair laughing. And they were like, what do you mean? You teenagers, you're going to come and build a church? And I said, oh, yeah, we building a nation. And so many times I wish I had kept their names so I could go and look them up and say, see what I mean? But it just says that when you have that determination, when you have that fire, and when you have that organization behind you, what you can do. When we first came to Atlanta, we didn't have anything. All we had was our little one suitcase. We just had one suitcase because we couldn't put much in Moo's car. We had one suitcase, and we had a picture of the National Training Center and a copy of Black Christian Nationalism.
Struggle.
And once we actually brought the first group of students from Atlanta to Detroit, and they actually saw the buildings we had, they just wept and wept and wept. They said, we can't believe it. We were just believing it based on what you said. But now we can see it for ourselves, which means that you can be so enthused, you can transmit the energy so much to another person that even without them seeing it, they can believe it. That's what you call faith. And that's what we did. We came, when we say we've come this far by faith, we really mean it. And it means, and now we're trying to move even further. Moving to the next stage.
The next stage. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I know that the era of expansion deals with a lot more.